Well, at the time of this recording, Trump has been in office for less than 2 weeks, and already he's passed some sweeping orders that could have a huge impact on the workforce. And of course, the usual suspects have cranked up the wine machines to 11.
These go to 11.
So come on back, we'll break it all down. Hey folks, Mark here with The Rational Workforce. Thanks so much for tuning in. So unless you've been living under a rock since January 20th, you have undoubtedly heard that President Trump, as promised, is wasting no time in delivering on those campaign pledges. We've got Elon Musk and Team Doge. They're all fired up. They're doing their thing.
Go yourself. Is that clear?
Confirmation hearings and all their associated theatrics and shenanigans are well underway.
Are you supportive of these onesies?
And of course, executive orders have been flying off of Trump's desk faster than Democratic senators jumping to the defense of their big pharma donors.
Senator, you're asking me not to sue pharmaceutical companies. Yeah, you are. All the members of this panel are accepting, including yourself, are accepting millions of dollars from the pharmaceutical industry. And protecting their interests.
Now, the nature of these executive orders have been sweeping, covering everything from protecting children from so-called gender-affirming care to stepping up aid and relief to victims of natural disasters, like the folks here in Western North Carolina who are still reeling from the hurricane impacts, and the Californians whose lives were devastated by the horrendous wildfires, or more specifically, the state's lack of readiness to protect their homes. But nestled amongst this slew of orders that have come out since January 20th are several, around 11 by my count, that could have some pretty major impacts for the workforce, either right away or a bit further down the road. Now, we're not going to take a deep dive into each of the 11. I mean, let's face it, there's only so much my ugly mug that you can tolerate in one sitting. But here are the ones that I think U.S. employers need to keep an eye on. Return to in-person work, hiring freeze, restoring accountability to policy influencing positions within the federal workforce, restoring accountability for career senior executives, defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government, ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing, reforming the federal hiring process and restoring merit to government service, ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity, reinstating service members discharged under the military's COVID-19 vaccination mandate, ending radical indoctrination in K-12 schooling, and additional measures to combat anti-Semitism. Now, that's a lot to chew on, but for today's video, we're going to unpack just a few because I think that several of these are interconnected. So let's take a look at a couple of the day one orders, specifically the return to in-person work and the termination of DEI programs and the whole preferencing piece. Now, both of these topics have been percolating for a while in the private sector, particularly in human resource circles. But the establishment of an executive order will likely embolden private sector employers even more. Now, the return to work executive order states that heads of all departments and agencies in the executive branch of government shall, as soon as practicable, take all necessary steps to return to work in person. It also states that leaders can make exemptions, but the sentiment is clear. Unless there is some extraordinary circumstance, get your ass back to work. Now, as expected, not everyone is exactly thrilled with this mandate. NBC News reported that several federal workers expressed a sense of fear, anger, and confusion, while others report that their immediate higher-ups are unable to answer questions about their employment and even about their day-to-day duties. Now, look, I get it. This is a thorny issue across the board, particularly if you moved away during the pandemic and you now no longer live near your employer. But pretending that this is some ghastly overreach is, well, it's a bit disingenuous. Here's why. First and foremost, no one in the government at any government agency seems to be tracking even the most basic information about federal remote workers and how they're performing their duties. There are self-reporting measures like the OPM's Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey that, surprise, surprise, indicate that work-from-home employees are marginally more engaged and confident than their in-office counterparts. And that's great and all, but actual hard numbers, actual metrics and outcomes tell a bit of a different story. So, for example, the IRS currently has a backlog of 1.2 million employee retention credit claims. Many have been pending for over a year. The IRS is also taking longer to resolve identity theft cases, with the average time to resolution increasing from 19 months to 22 months. Now, the IRS employs 82,990 full-time workers, and around half of them work from home. Here's another example. The Veterans Benefits Administration has a backlog of 257,253 claims, most of which include disability compensation and pension claims. Tens of thousands of these claims have been awaiting decisions for a year or longer, and that's despite implementing mandatory overtime work for claims processors. 135,000 VBA employees currently work from home, many of which are claims processors. Here's another example. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services has a backlog of over 8 million pending cases, and this agency encourages telework for all its employees. And the list goes on. So, despite claims that telework boosts efficiency and satisfaction and engagement, the numbers tell a different story about how effective they actually are in getting the job done. Now, in the real world, in the private sector, where most of us live, when performance tanks, there are consequences. Or, as we've seen through the spate of private sector layoffs in 2023 and 2024, sometimes people lose their jobs even if the company is healthy. I mean, it sucks, but it happens. Now, you layer on the fact that these federal roles are funded by taxpayers, those very same taxpayers who are themselves contending with layoffs and their own return to work challenges, and, well, I wouldn't expect a great deal of empathy. Now, in the examples I just highlighted, the workers in those agencies had significant and generous work from home policies. Of course, other factors may have come into play that contributed to those inefficiencies and lack of results, but doubling down on policies that aren't delivering positive outcomes just isn't sustainable. When sweeping changes are introduced to try and reverse the trend, good, hardworking people are going to get swept up with those who are milking the system. And again, it's not fair, but it's just the way things happen sometimes. And that leads me to the DEI executive order. Now, as we've covered in previous videos on this channel, a growing number of companies, including some pretty noteworthy brands, have been pushing back on ESG and DEI policies, particularly over the past 18 months. Now, these initiatives might have been designed with good intentions, but in recent years, DEI has certainly lost its way. It's devolved into a check-the-box performative exercise for many businesses, and in others, it's become a program that seems to be expressly designed to run air cover, far excluding groups of workers versus elevating all workers. For example, neurodiversity wasn't anywhere on the radar screen for most employers, and ideological diversity was aggressively opposed. Employees were given backdoor purity tests, such as mandates to put their pronouns in their bios, or to attend pride events, or to attend mandatory training programs that sometimes insulted their intelligence and even where they came from, all under the banner of supporting DEI, whether it conflicted with their own personal beliefs or their religion or not. Now, all these programs started to spill over into pop culture, and companies from Disney to Bud Light to Target to the Los Angeles Dodgers learned that for the majority of Americans, it was all being pushed too far, too aggressively. And in 2024, people who politely smiled and nodded while being called every ism in the book stopped worrying about being canceled and started pushing back with their wallets, forcing companies to walk back these policies and practices. Folks like Robbie Starbucks started calling companies out on these practices. And like Domino's, brand after brand after brand abandoned those once deeply held principles. Now, with the advent of this executive order, private companies have even more reasons and more air cover to push back. Now, I'm sure some companies will embrace their #resist principles and swim against the tide. But I think for the most part, DEI acolytes have overplayed their hand, and now DEI is more like a pejorative than a principled and respected program. It's just the way things have gone. Now, do we throw out the baby with the bathwater? I don't think so. I think making workplaces inclusive is critical to the success of most companies. But you don't create that kind of environment by closing out, shutting down, and stifling the voice of people just because they're white or conservative or over the age of 40. And let's face it, that's kind of what's been happening out there. Now, in a nutshell, for better or for worse, federal employees are starting to bump into things that their private sector brethren have been contending with for years. I don't think that's a bad thing. But how do you feel? Leave a comment below and let me know what's on your mind about all these rapid fire changes. And if you like what you saw, give us a like, ring the bell, click subscribe, do all the things that will help us to keep the channel growing. I really appreciate it. And stay tuned, we're only 2 weeks into a 4-year term, so we're going to have lots more to cover in the weeks and month ahead. And in the meantime, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a great day. We'll catch you on the next one.